And welcome back to America Right Now. Violence in the Capitol. The president lashing out at his vice president, Nancy Pelosi calling the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and new calls for the 25th Amendment and impeachment just days before President Trump is set to leave office. Let's unpack all of that with our legal panel for this morning. Thane Rosenbaum is a distinguished university professor at Touro College Law School. He's also the author of Saving Free Speech from Itself. And Bill McGinley is the principal of the Vogel Group. He's also a former assistant to the president and White House cabinet secretary. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being here on this incredible week that we never thought that we would really quite see here in America. Professor, I want to go to you first. And let's just settle this because there's been too much debate about it. One of the president's staunchest supporters, Vice President Mike Pence, got thrown under the bus this week in a very big way. The president wanted him to unilaterally reject slates of electors. Now, from a legal standpoint, does the law provide for him to do that?
I'll answer that in a moment, Tom, but I do want to say I really admired how wise and wonderful your editorial just was, that you just delivered on the air. It really was wonderful to hear. Well, the Electoral Count Act, which was essentially the statute that they were having the debates about in connection with trying to object to anywhere between 3 and 6 states and their electoral votes, in no way provides for unilateral options for the Vice President of the United States to open up the letters of ascertainment in alphabetical order and then pick and choose which slate of ballots he wanted to enter. That was what they were asking him to do, essentially to replace the ballots of what was certified by the governor of each of those states and substitute a different set of ballots. And no, there was no legal basis to do so, not at all.
Okay. Bill, the narrative from the left-wing media, Democrats, and even some Republicans is that the president incited an insurrection, that he's responsible for it, that he's a danger to the country, and therefore Pelosi and Schumer have called for invoking of the 25th Amendment. Your thoughts on those 2 points?
I think after the events of January 6th, which I think troubled us all, and I think we all condemned the violence, the destruction of property, and what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, calls for a moment in the country where we should be trying to lower the temperature of division between the two parties and within society, not ratchet it up. I think calls for impeachment when a president has, 10, 11, 12 days left in his term is one of the most divisive things that can be done to try and ratchet up the tensions. I think this moment calls for real leadership by men and women of goodwill on both sides of the aisle, so that, as the president said in his address, not on the 6th, but the next day, there's going to be a peaceful transition of power, that he's going to make sure that this is going to go off. And I think that that's where we need to be right now, not trying to ratchet up the tensions through an impeachment process.
Yeah, it's been really, really stark. I mean, when you look at what Schumer and Pelosi and Biden have done over the last several days, instead of trying to unify the country, try to divide it even further. Professor, Nancy Pelosi is getting ready to file a second round of impeachment articles against the president just days before he leaves office. An article has been drafted. It accuses the president of inciting violence. Isn't this just, gratuitously stomping on somebody's political grave and trying to vilify either an individual or the people associated with his movement?
Tom, President Trump still has 75 million voters out there. Yeah. Let us not forget, those people have spoken too. And I want to believe that the vast, vast, vast majority of them also were appalled by what they saw at the Capitol building. And it did not in any way diminish their sense of commitment to the policies of Donald Trump and the leadership of Donald Trump. Whether you like him or not, part of the difficulty that we're seeing, and I think Bill was framing that issue as well, is in order to unify the nation, President-elect Biden is going to have to speak to the 75 million people who continue to feel disenfranchised, and why this past election made them feel even more disenfranchised, which some of them, of course, with very bad motives and incredible destructive behavior and impulses, acted upon. But it doesn't change the fact that we are a divided nation, And this new administration has an obligation to understand the movement of Trump 4 years ago, which made his election improbable at the time, and it turned him into a national hero to millions and millions of Americans. And so that is a question that still needs to be answered. These devices now, I also think that President Trump was partly responsible for some of those divisions, for inflaming them, but they still existed, and it's what led to his election in 2016.
Yeah. Bill, do you think that Nancy Pelosi will get the votes given how tight it is in the House, do you think that she would get the votes to pass articles this week?
I think if it was done this week, she probably would get the votes. I think even though the Democratic majority is much more narrow, I think the raw emotional reaction to what happened on January 6th is still fresh enough that she might even get a couple of Republican votes. Mm-hmm. I think it's not going to be helpful to moving the nation forward after what was a very consequential week in American history. And as I said in the previous statement, this is a time for men and women of goodwill to rise above the moment, the emotions of the moment, and try and figure out a path forward to lower the temperature in the country, to make sure that we are putting the Americans who are suffering through the pandemic, small businesses that are shuttering, and start focusing on what needs to be done to make sure that this nation, after the pandemic, is in a position to move forward. And I think that's where the emphasis should be right now.
Yeah, Biden clearly is failing his first test of leadership by letting Pelosi and Schumer proceed with these theatrics. Okay, Bill and Thane, I have to take a quick break, so don't move. We've got more that we need to talk about with our legal panel when we get back to America Right Now. Please stay with us.